a chance to ask us some questions as well, and hopefully, I don't know, just have some fun for an hour or so.
The competition as well. So, goodies to give away at the end. So we're going to test your MotoGP knowledge, and if it's up to scratch, you could be walking away with some books.
Neil did the quiz on me earlier today, and I am delighted to say I did get all three questions right. So I think I might have won something.
That'll be a first, eh?
It will be a first.
Just to quickly introduce ourselves, my name's Adam Wheeler. My first Grand Prix working was 2001 in Japan. I don't know if people who are fans of the sport remember, but it was the 500cc race where Valentino Rossi and Max Biaggi declared their love for one another.
Via hand signals.
Yes, by universal language. So yeah, it's been quite some time for me in the paddock, and I'm working a lot in motocross as well, so yeah, a long career.
I'm David Emmett, started with Motor Matters, and then we joined up to do this Paddock Pass podcast. I've been in Paddock since 2009. My first professional motorcycle race was 2008, Portimao, first race to Portimao, where the roads were only open on Sunday nights to actually get in, otherwise you were over the little country roads. If you've ever been to Portimao, you probably know exactly which road it is. But that was the last race of Troy Bayliss in World Superbikes, and it was a fantastic race, it was a fantastic event. And also Portimao is just a fantastic place to go. If you're going to go to another race, pick Portimao.
I'm Neil Morrison. I do some commentary for Torres live World Commentary Feed for Moto2, Moto3, Moto E as well. I do some writing for various publications in the UK, America and Australia, and I've been working in MotoGP since 2015. So yeah, my first race was actually here in Jerez 10 years ago, so big anniversary.
Was it? I thought it was because I met Neil, the first time I met Neil was Steve English, who does World Superbikes, was part of that. He'd arranged a house for us at Valencia 2014 last night, or it was the last race weekend of the year, and I sort of turned up for this Airbnb we were going to play. There was about 8 of us in there, I can't remember. But it was, Steve met me earlier and said, oh, by the way, there's an Irish fella in your room. So that was how I met him. We got over it and became friends.
First actual memory of David in person was waking up and seeing a bald man in his pants standing over me. I'm delighted to say that our relationship went from strength to strength from there.
These days you're more famous for your hat rather than your hands.
Well, yes, that's right. Well, it's a graceful. I like to age gracefully.
Absolutely. Well, listen, let's talk a bit about some of why not like our favourite riders or our least favourite riders. From all the years that we've been interviewing and dealing with people in this paddock. Dave, is there anybody that kind of stands out for you that you kind of thought, well, good bloke, speaks well, does the job? Because as a journalist, we don't only need people that are easy to get along with, but also quite informative. Currently in the pack, I'd say people like Luca Marini. In his second language is, he's very sort of erudite, he's very articulate, tells you a lot of details, gives you a lot of good information. But,
for me, it was Casey Stoner when I started, because what you needed to do was make sure that Casey was angry about something, which was, not all that unusual, and then asking a completely unrelated question, and you get an absolutely brilliant answer. He could explain things really well. I think part of his success, what makes part of a really great racer is the ability to explain, because they also have to explain to their crew chief, the bike is doing this, and I don't want it to do this, or the bike is doing this, and because the bike is doing this, I can't do that. And Casey was brilliant at explaining that sort of thing. Then Casey stopped, and we were sort of casting around for somewhere else. And Andrea, when I first met Andrea Dovizioso, he was he was quite reserved.
Oh, come on, Dave, you've got to let Neil talk about Andrea Dovizioso.
I'll let him talk about it, and got heard of me in a moment. But yeah, he hated the media, he wouldn't speak to us, and then he realised, if I just talk about technical things, then people will stop asking me, trying to make a scandal out of it.
I bore them to death.
Yeah, exactly. And then Doggy retired, and we ended up with Luca Marini. And Marini's just fantastic at explaining in simple terms exactly what the problem is with something or what they're trying to achieve.
How was it for you when Dobby retired? Did you cope? Are you still coping?
I'm still in mourning, actually. Yeah, that's why I wear blank pretty much all the time. He is actually here this weekend.
He is. He was on my flight.
Still is a bit starstruck when I speak to him. Yeah, he's just very erudite, as you say, and you always love to see the underdog battling and fighting with someone that maybe is the kind of expected front runner. Those 3 years where he was taking the fight to mark, I always found pretty great to watch. And then another obvious name for me was Nicky Hayden, because the first year that I worked in MotoGP, 2015, was Nicky's last year in this championship. And I don't know if any of you remember that year, but he was on the Open Honda, running for the Aspar team. It was a horrible, horrible year for Nicky. He was really struggling to score points most weekends. And it was quite strange because I was working for an American magazine, and I was basically showing up at Nicky's debriefs at the end of each day. Most of the time I would be the only person there, and it was like, oh my God, I'm sat here with Nicky. And he was just like such a nice, laid-back guy. The person that you saw on the television was exactly the person that he was in person. And sometimes riders can be a bit funny. Maybe they might not acknowledge you if you come across them in the paddock, but he was always someone that would stop and say hello, just be genuinely warm and friendly. That was another name that obviously comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sums it up perfectly with Nicky's character. He was somebody that would treat everyone the same, which is, and usually not just journalists, but general public can be a bit of a burden to some of these riders. I mean, if you're in the paddock or you're wandering around, you can see the way they kind of zip in, just generally trying to get their thing done, rather than thinking necessarily the fans of the sport.
Yeah, and Nicky also understood the job. Like the being a professional motorcycle racer, it was a BSB rider who described it this way, and I can't remember exactly who it was. He basically said my job is to persuade people to give me money so that I can go and race motorbikes. And that's exactly what Nicky understood, that he had to give you something. So in any media debrief, any sort of interview, he made sure you had a quote. You had something. You could go away. You'd walk out of every sort of media debrief with a headline, which was a remarkable skill, and he always took the time for you. He was always friendly. He was always polite. He brushed me off once because I just wanted to ask him a few things, but he was busy doing something else. He was incredibly polite about it, whereas there are plenty of other riders who will just turn around, walk away, and pretend you don't exist.
I quite like
you weren't existing.
I quite like Cal Crutchlow. Because he had a fantastic sort of dry sense of humour. I mean, he can level you with a look, never mind his words. But then I think behind sort of the veneer of, bravado, and some would say even arrogance sometimes, there was like a big heart.
Yeah. I mean, Cal had a massive heart. He had a massive heart and a massive chip on his shoulder, and that made him extremely lovable. He was a genuinely nice guy. The strangest thing, the meeting I had with Cal Crutchlow, was I said something. In fact, I said something about his wages at Assen. It was a pole position to a group of people on pole position. The next day, I was called to speak to Cal by the Tech 3 press person. But I was sort of sat on the back of the scooter and taken to the physio because he was having a massage. So he's sitting there telling me that, sitting there sort of in his pants being massaged, telling me off, which was definitely one of the honest things which has happened to me.
Yeah, sorry, Neil.
I like naked people in pants coming up in this conversation.
I'd like to say, my last interview with Dobby was while he was in the pants getting an inside massage. I didn't take a picture of it, I was got a bit invasive. But I together with my lovely wife who's sitting over there, we have 2 children, now 18 and 16. The 18-year-old likes doing interviews, so being a journalist, I've been to do interviews with a couple of riders, and the younger one likes taking photographs. And the older one, I think he must be, when he was like 12 years old, I said to Cal, would you mind speaking a minute for 10 minutes? He's going to write something for his school, he's going to write a little interview. He said, yeah, fine. So we went into the LCR hospitality, sat down with him, and a good friend of ours, Cormac GP, who's standing at the back of the room, one of the best photographers in the sport, was giggling away because...
next to his partner, who's a much better photographer.
He was giggling away because Carol sort of started the interview with Alex, my son, saying, it's nice to talk to you because you know, you seem to know much more than a lot of people I speak to, i.e. your dad. I was like, yeah, typical crush. And then I said to Alex, you should finish the interview by asking him something funny, you know, something, you know, that's not related to bikes, because he did the usual kid thing. It was like, what's it like to race at 300 kilometers an hour? And I said, why don't you ask him if he likes pancakes or something? And so he said, you know, his mother tongue is Catalan, so he's speaking in his second language. He said, my last question is, do you like pancakes? And Crutchlow just looked dead at him and said, that's it, you've broken me. Because now I've got to go back to my motorhome and I've got to have some pancakes. Because he was addicted to like Nutella and he liked his snacks. I mean, Carol and a cookie jar was a pretty lethal combination. So Alex had this panic-stricken expression on his face. What have I done? What have I offended him? It's, no, he was a big softie. So special place of affection for Carl.
Yeah, the first day that I ever did commentary for Donna's World Feed, I went to Cal's debrief at the end of that day and he said, Neil, I really hope you're not thinking of taking up commentary as a full-time gig. He always holds a special place in my heart.
Well, that makes it quite easy for us to twist into riders that we really didn't have much time for. I mean, not that many of them have time for us.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't so much that we didn't have time for them, they didn't have time for us. There were some riders. I mean, Danny Pedrosa has a reputation for being difficult. And he was difficult if you asked him stupid questions. He hated doing media. The strange thing is he's completely changed after he stopped. He's opened up, you know, he just hated that whole side of it. But when you could get him to, like literally, it would be a media debrief, all of us sitting around and he sort of reports in front of him, and I'd say, so did you try this? And he'd go, and I'd say, could you at least say yes or no? So I've got it on my tape. Which he took fairly well. But when he did, again, if you could get him interested, he'd give you brilliant answers. He could really explain things really, really well, which is why he turned into such a great test rider. But there are other riders.
Yeah, well, I mean, in 2018, his last season with Danny, I mean, it was a torrid year because he just couldn't make the Michelin's work.
Yeah, he was too right for Michelin's basically. Couldn't get the heat.
I remember making one of his media debriefs, which, you know, just to explain quickly, riders after the sessions at the end of the day will talk to media for a certain amount of time, usually it's 5 to 10 minutes. Well, 5 minutes in English and then 5 minutes in their language, and then they'll go and do TV, or vice versa. And I remember Danny in one debrief, a journalist, there wasn't many people there because he wasn't having a great season, but they asked him a question. And it was almost like a leading question, because sometimes you have to ask dumb stuff to riders because you want them to talk on a specific subject. And I just remember his body language. I mean, I think he actually rubbed his face like this at one point and he was like, you know, what is going on in my life? And I thought, but when he actually sort of said, I'm quitting, I thought it was maybe just to get away from us.
It probably was, yeah, to an extent. Yeah, no, there was a lot of, he really felt like the pressure, because also he came into the sport as sort of Spain's golden boy, because he was a brilliant 125 rider, he was a brilliant 250 rider. He had a fantastic first year in MotoGP.
Actually, David, it was really interesting because Mark Marquez yesterday in the Jerez press conference was saying that he'd learned so much from Pedrosa in his first season in HRC. And then he got to a point where he thought, I can't copy what Pedrosa is doing anymore because his style was that distinctive.
Exactly. I actually interviewed Mike Leitner once to ask him, you know, why, because this was when Mike Leitner was
former Repsol Honda team manager.
Former Repsol, he used to be the crew chief for Danny Pedrosa, and he was basically one of the staff KTM's MotoGP project. And he was, one of his first hires was Danny Pedrosa as a, I think his first hire was Mika Kallio as a test driver. And Mike Leitner said, what I learned from Danny Pedrosa was if you have a fast, smaller rider, they can't use their body to control the bike. They have to get much more from the bike. So they have to be much more sensitive about what the bike is doing. They have to really feel what's going on. And that, when you're trying to develop a bike, that's really, really useful. It's why Danny Pedrosa has been such a fantastic sort of power for KTM as well.
You know, did you have any particularly worrying or nightmare scenarios interviewing riders?
Nightmare scenarios, I'm not sure. Like, the reality is that I would say almost every rider in the MotoGP paddock is fairly media savvy, has has a rough idea of how to interact with the media, whether it's TV or whether it's the written media, journalists, and they know how to be polite. I mean, it's very rare that you see a rider lose his temper these days in a media debrief, for example, or get really naughty or shitty with someone. So, I have to say, it's kind of few and far between. When I speak to some of the older journalists that are still working in MotoGP, I mean, some of the stories they tell me from the 90s are
Which was the time when you had to go knock on someone's motorhome door?
Yeah, and I remember one journalist who will remain unnamed told me he once weighed up hitting a world champion to see whether would it be worth it, the satisfaction I would get from punching him because he was being so obnoxious to losing the job that I have. Probably worked out that it wasn't worth it in the end. But yeah, by contrast, in present day, I can't really think of too many names except one Italian.
Yes, there is one Italian who is all our favourite. He's no longer racing in the MotoGP paddock, which is a clue.
He ate something dodgy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
he was extremely. Was it you who he turned up to the media debrief, and so it's Andrea Iannone basically turned up to a media debrief. You sort of like sit down and start talking. But he turned up, he was on his phone, stood there for 5 minutes talking on his phone in Italian to whoever was on the other end, turned around and walked away with it, and that was his media. He'd done his 5 minutes, the 5 minutes that were in his contract. Because I also remember talking to the then head of Ducati PR about working with Iannone, and he said, he had to take him aside at one point, because Iannone was saying, "Why are you breaking my balls?" And Julian Jones Jr. said, "Look, all I need from you is these few minutes a day, and I won't break your balls anymore. You're free to go off work." And he was a little bit more user-friendly after that. But he just despised, he openly despised, like the others at least put on the pretense that they'd be polite to us, but he just openly despised us, which is, have to admire his honesty.
Yeah. Completely fair, I would say. I mean, there was one occasion where I remember, I think it was in a test in Qatar, there weren't many journalists there. I was in debrief with Iannone, maybe one other journalist was in this debrief as well. I asked him 2 questions, and when I asked him a third, he kind of almost squared up to me like, "What, you want one more thing?" And then there was another time when, similar to what you said, Dave, when he was on his phone for about 5 minutes, talking, and we were all sitting, there was about 10 of us standing waiting for us. It was very clear that we were waiting to speak to him, and he was standing on his phone, and I was pretty sure that he wasn't actually speaking to anyone, he was just putting on a bit of an act. And then I said, "So, Andrea, are you excited about racing at this track this weekend?" Or some banal intro question. And he kind of pretended to talk, and he just looked at me and said, "What?" So, he wasn't the most charming of guys, but after a while it became almost a joy to go to his debriefs, because you really genuinely didn't know what you were going to get. Sometimes he could be lovely. I remember getting a hug from him after one race one day, just randomly.
It wasn't squaring up to you again, you just went in for the lunch.
Yeah, so it was like a box of chocolates, as Forrest Gump would say. Occasionally you never really knew what you were going to get.
Yeah, because our colleague Steve, who's now in Superbikes, apparently is completely different in Superbikes. She's, again, like the World Superbike paddock is a much friendlier place than the MotoGP paddock. It's a much nicer place to be. And he says, Iannone's great, he's much more relaxed. He's much more relaxed in his sort of in the way that he treats Jerez and the way that he responds to Jerez. So yeah.
Well, if you stick a syringe in a piece of steak, then maybe it changes again. Hopefully we can edit that bit out. Dave, I think I've never asked you this, but who was like your favourite rider as a kid, like growing up, or who was like a motorcyclist that? Okay, I know you're not one for nostalgia, no. And if anybody listens to the podcast, Dave has a few little pet peeves. Is there any in tiramisu? We had dessert yet, Gordon?
No, I mean, because I grew up watching my uncle race brass track, and I remember, watching Barry Sheen on telly, because I really am that old. But then I sort of drifted away a little bit. I was sort of vaguely aware of racing in the 90s. Stopped watching Grand Prix in the 90s because Mick Doohan was one of the most incredible riders in the world, but he just seems to find the whole process of actually winning and racing and winning a bit of a pain. He just wanted the success. So like Carl Fogarty, World Superbikes, was fantastic. just really good value. And that era with Fogarty, Key,
Aaron Sly, Colin, Scott Russell.
Simon Crayfar. Yeah, I mean it was just really it was great racing. It was really entertaining racing. The Bostrums. To me, like one of the strangest things is like I remember sort of like sitting down, setting time aside to watch Neil Hodgson race on TV, and now I get to talk to him, and it's like amazing. Like, this is one of the people that I idolised as a young person. But it was the same, like when the first time you come to Paddock, you go in and you start doing the media debriefs, and quite quickly you realise that these are people as well. They're not just stars; they're people, and that's sort of the human side I always find fascinating.
I think it was the human side for me because my dad used to take me to Brands Hatch a lot. We lived 20 minutes away from the circuit. And I can remember going there as a kid, seeing power bike races, superbike, whatever it was, even like club races. And one day there was this guy on the tannoy who just sounded so perky and lively and happy to be there racing in this terrible British weather. And it was Wayne Gardner, just before he entered like Grand Prix racing. And then obviously when he came to 500s and became a factory sort of Rothmans Honda rider, I just found his style electric. And for me as a young teenager, it was, it was very easy to identify blue versus red, Marlboro Yamahas, and this kind of outgoing character, this outgoing Aussie compared to say Wayne Rainey, where also they were slightly contrasting. So for me, it was always like Gardner as a kid. He was the rider I followed. Was it a road racer or who was your man?
Yeah, well, I'm from Northern Ireland, so spent a lot of time watching road racing growing up, going to the Ironman TT with my dad and with my mum, who was actually in attendance tonight, just over here, Ross and Jerez. So yeah, enjoyed Dunlop, I guess, was a big hero growing up to anyone that follows road racing, and yeah, was absolutely obsessed with Grand Prix racing from 1988. I was like one of those really nerdy, obsessive kids that would follow it like...
Was.
Very true. Yes, I am one of those obsessive nerds that I used to come out like the clippings from Motorcycle News and make a little scrapbook of like all the race reports and things like that when I was younger. And yeah, Kevin Schwann's, it was the age of the superheroes really back then. The top guys racing in the 500s, doing Wayne Gardner, Eddie Lawson, Steve Pig. But yeah, Kevin Schwann's was always the one that stood out to me for his riding style, for his celebrations, for his kind of cavalier attitude when they were pinning. Yeah, great time for American racing, and yeah, hopefully it'll be a great time for American racing soon with this young man coming through the ranks, Mr. Daniel Jr. Good eye for him.
Exactly. And I have to mention Valentino Rossi because like watching Valentino, I sort of lost interest in Grand Prix racing, and then there's this wacky Italian kid sticking dolls on the back of his wanted bike. That sort of, it really captivated it captured my imagination. It's why I ended up doing this. I started writing about MotoGP in 2006, which turned out to be, we were all expecting yet another Valentino Rossi whitewash, and it didn't turn out the way at all. It was fantastic. So I also got lucky at the point at which I started. I started in one of the truly great MotoGP years.
Talking about Valentino, I was speaking with somebody yesterday in the press room, and after his podcast, was it earlier this year or last year, where he was talking about #Sepang 2015? Has his reputation become a bit tarnished because Marc Marquez is really turning the narrative around in his career at the moment, and it seems like Marc's longevity versus his humility as well, and what he's still doing, and Valentino's kind of evident maybe kind of bitterness, even though it was only one snapshot of his perspective.
Yeah,
is that changing? Because everyone was very sympathetic towards Valentino. Oh no, Marc robbed him in his last chance to win another title.
Which isn't true because he could have won in 2016 because he was even better in 2016. I think it robbed him of his last chance because he became so obsessed with what happened in 2015. What great racers do, which again, what Rossi used to do, you could see the difference between him and other racers, was he would be behind someone or in front of someone, he'd make a mistake, and the next corner the mistake was gone. You could see in his riding the mistake wasn't there. And in other riders, you'd see them carry this mistake with them for 2, 3, 4 corners. So they would be like, they would lose maybe 2/10 in one corner, and then they would lose another half a tenth there and a half a tenth and a half a tenth. Valentino only ever lost those 2/10. and 2015 messed with his head so badly that he got stuck in his head in 2016 when he should have sort of put it behind him, and he could have had another championship because he was so good that year. One of the greatest things, I mean, for me, one of the great things that Marquez did was he brought out the best in Valentino Rossi. Like Rossi really had to step up his game. And Stoner, yeah, and Lorenzo. This is the thing. What great riders do, what great rivals do, is they make other riders better because they know, like, oh Christ, now I've got to do something. Now I've got to beat this bastard. I've got to find a way to do it. So I have to step up my game. So they start studying and learning and just really focusing on any kind of tiny detail, trying to find a secret, trying to find a way, trying to find a way to do it.
He was very good at improvisation as well. I mean, very adaptive, and I think something you see when you see Valentino on TV or on videos or in the circuit, you kind of get this idea of a slightly plastic, flamboyant, maybe even like a brainless figure, but he's not like that at all.
No.
I mean, you know, he's highly intelligent, and the way he crafted his persona, I think, is one of the outstanding things. Never mind his results in MotoGP.
Yeah, the other thing is that you change as a person just as you grow up. I mean, certainly when he was, 2000. In the first decade of the century, he was much more pure because he was younger. Then he got a little bit older, he became a little bit more sensitive. Whereas he had to work harder. He didn't really, when he was racing against Etijiba now, in those years, he didn't have to work so hard because he could win just on pure natural talent. You saw it in was it Philip on 2003?
10-second deficit.
Yeah, 10-second deficit, and he just
dropped the hammer.
Yeah, just dropped the hammer. He dropped his lap times by about 7 tenths. Nobody drops their lap times by 7 tenths unless they have all of that to spare.
And well, I mean, another thing as well. Neil was talking about riders' media obligations, and the fact that they have to talk to us. And Valentino very rarely did one-to-ones. It would be with very sort of specialist or mainstream media. And I remember Carol as well saying at one point, well, why does he have to? You kind of think about it, I think it's true. I mean, Valentino Rossi is not going to get more famous, or he's not going to get more money, or more exposure by speaking to TNT Sports or to the Times. I mean, he does it because he wants to, or he wants to push MotoGP. And obviously he got to a point where, plus 30, whatever, he didn't really have to do media anymore. When you get to that level, then I think that's extremely rare in any sport, never mind ours.
Yeah, I think when he retired, it just sort of put into perspective how special he was as a teenager coming through. It seemed like when he was 16, 17, he already had this entire plan mapped out in his head, and he knew exactly how to maximize his profile and any sort of publicity, which for a 16 or 17-year-old kid is just like off the scale. I mean, you don't really see that at all from any rider in any class nowadays, but he was picking fights with Max Biaggi, the Italian superstar at the time, when he was a class below him, when he was 6, 7, 8 years below him as well, or younger than him. And he knew that was going to build a rivalry, it was going to build publicity, it was going to build his legend. And you kind of feel that, as well as being a genius on a motorcycle, he had this unbelievable foresight of just how to maximize his kind of imprint.
Because I think I think it caught Max Biaggi by surprise to suddenly find that he was, he was the baddie, and he was like, why? What did I do? I didn't do anything.
And then he played up to the titles.
Then he played up to, which is always great. I think sports need baddies. There aren't enough baddies in sport. Those baddies are great.
And you have to give him credit for that.
Because
he didn't give a fuck. It was like, you want to paint me that way, I'll be the anti-Rossi.
I'll be the baddie, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you have to say it whether you love him or whether you hate him. Marquez in recent times, maybe not so much at the moment, but in recent times, especially when he was at his most dominant in 17, 18, 19, he did not care what people thought about him. He embraced the baddies, didn't he?
Yeah, but also, again, a little bit like, not anywhere near to the same level, but he understood also how to get into the heads of his... You saw it in Austin, in that absolute chaos on the grid. That was, I mean, the other thing is, the funniest thing about that is that Mark thought he was being cleverer than everyone else, and he wasn't. He actually got the rules wrong.
Yeah, but he had the balls to do it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. He knew that it would also just mess with everyone else. So, and because, he's willing to do that, he's also willing to just, push the boundaries all of the time.
Do we admire that, or is he almost bringing the sport into disrepute?
Yes.
Use a football in.
Yes. Yeah. Are we for or against him? Yes.
Is there anybody here, raise your hand, who doesn't think that Mark could win this weekend? I mean, it's sport, right? I mean, look at Qatar. I mean, who would have said Maverick Vinales would be in the top three? I mean, it's looking pretty. I mean, the Ducatis are incredible today. It was a shame for the crash for Fabio.
Yeah.
I didn't get to hear what he said in his debrief today, but he was sort of really pushing it. And interestingly, Pecco Bagnaia was telling us that he believes that Alex Marquez was taking too many risks.
Yeah, which is how he ended up in the sort of the crash barrier. But yeah, I mean, it does look. It's always interesting. We always say like Jerez is the first race of the season, the first proper race, because you've got Qatar and all the other overseas. The tracks are different, the conditions are different. Like Qatar, you're going from sort of 30 degrees in the day to 19 at night. You go from 50 degrees track temperature, or sometimes 60 degrees, to 25. You go to Argentina, the track is filthy on the first day and then it cleans up. You go to Kota, which is just a very peculiar track. Very
Second longest?
track.
Second longest? Oh,
Yeah,
after
exactly.
Silverstone.
Yeah, exactly. You go to Buriram where they have a special tyre because of the heat, because of the drying process. So it's really, really different. And then you come here and it's tiny compared to a place like Qatar or Buriram. It's really tight, it's really close. You have to ride completely differently. I think both Mark and Pecco were saying, I haven't changed the way that I brake differently because I'm used to these big open tracks, and these are not big open tracks.
I mean, Jerez is kind of special, as Dave was saying. For me today, I think you saw a little bit of what, it was like a taster of what you love about it, also what you hate, because anyone who got stuck in the traffic, I think we have to get up at 6 a.m. or something on Sunday just to make sure you're in on time or get a good place or whatever. But then, of course, you know, the crowd and the atmosphere, the weather, that kind of combination as well. And just seeing like the passion for racing. I mean, that's something you don't get so much in the US because it's not that busy and the site is so vast, especially in Silverstone as well. That's the case. Qatar obviously is a unique event. It's not renowned for its atmosphere. Thailand was pretty good to launch the season. I thought that was, you know, you get a real buzz from the fans there because they're fully into the motorcycling. But Neil, you were talking about Jerez on the podcast this week, and you know, aside from the fact that Susan comes here every year as well, I mean, that just shows how much there is a favouritism for Jerez and the Morrison family.
Yes, exactly. I mean, what's not to love about Jerez? Dave and I were talking about this coming in on the drive from the track. I mean, you've got nice weather, you've got a cool track, you've got a fantastic atmosphere. I mean, sometimes they like to tinker with the attendance figures here, so you're never sure, is it 70,000 people that are in attendance? Is it 130? Anyway, it's always very busy. There's lots of people around, and they give the impression that they're going absolutely crazy. Had the good fortune of spectating here, I think maybe 3 or 4 times before I started working at MotoGP. Sat in that stadium section around turns 9 and turns 10. Always crazy atmosphere from about 6 a.m. on Sunday morning. And that's kind of what that's part of the thing I think that you look for when you come to a MotoGP race. You're looking for that sort of passion, that love, and maybe the chance to spark up a conversation with some other person that's passionate who sat next to you in the grandstand. So this always ranks very, very highly on my kind of favourite tracks list.
Well, listen, as we said earlier, we've got a couple of prizes, sort of like a competition, and these questions are made by Neil. And Neil's like a great friend of mine, but he is an absolute geek for trivia and results or anything else. In fact, one year in Valencia, he confided in us that when he had packed to come to the GP, he had forgotten to put any underwear in his suitcase. And we were waiting for one media debrief to speak to a certain rider, and I don't know, someone asked him who had won like the 1992 Japanese GP 125 or whatever, and of course the Japanese GP were half the field were wild cards and nobody ever knew them. And you managed to read off like the top 6. I said to you, how can you know that and forget to pack any underwear? that just sums up, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I only wish I had your level.
Yes, the underwear packing part of his brain is completely filled with motorbike races, 80cc motorbike races from the 1970s.
In my comic.
Can't remember if I brushed my teeth this morning, but if you ask me who was second in Suzuki in 1992, I remember.
Well, listen, Neil's going to ask the questions about how this is going to work. We've got codes for the Isle of Man TT coverage. So if you want to watch the Isle of Man TT live online, you don't have to pay for the coverage. We've got some special codes to give away. We've got 3. So we've got 3 questions. Neil's going to ask them. The first person to shout out the right answer gets the code. We'll grab your email afterwards to come up and see. One of the 3 of us will write down your email address and present you the code so you can see the TT you're in. And this is thanks to Steve English, by the way. We wish he could have been here. So go for it now.
Yes, the TT Live, I It's an application, you can access it. Basically, there's full coverage of all the racing. I think all the practice sessions as well, with video footage. I think it costs about £30. So if this is your thing, you could get lucky with some of this. So basically, I'm going to ask a question. The first person to shout out the correct answer will be the winner. And you're going to do 3 questions. I'm going to have 3 different winners for each question. Okay, so I hope you've brought your trivia games with you guys.
Yeah, put your phones away, mate. This is just no cheating.
Yeah. So, okay, the first one. Which rider has won the most MotoGP / 500cc races at Jerez since the first Grand Prix was held here in 1987?
Take a wild guess. If you don't know, just shout out their name.
It's Valentino Rossi. Yeah, we have a winner. Winner number 1.
By the way, the same person can't win all 3 codes. Alright, so you're out now.
The second question also features Valentino Rossi. Which rider did Valentino nerf off at the final corner on the last lap of the 2005 Spanish Grand Prix? That gentleman is the winner of that one, so congratulations, sir. We'll get that code on the track, please. Okay, and third and finally, which current MotoGP rider won the 2020 Spanish Grand Prix, which was also notable for the crash which broke Marc Marquez's upper right arm? Gentleman in the red t-shirt there with the glasses, yes, well done.
Okay, that was good. Oh, you got rid of those codes pretty quick. Fair play. Listen, guys, if anyone's got any questions for us, I'll come around and jump up and pass the microphone. If anyone's got a question, just raise their hand. For Neil, David, and myself. Don't be shy. What do you say?
Second in the 90s about interview rights. Did you ever interview John Kaczynski?
No. He's before our time,
Yeah,
so
before our time.
we missed him. But we heard stories about him. He was, I think he suffered. I don't know whether
OCD.
Yeah, I think he's an obsessive compulsive. So he wanted everything extremely clean. This is also something which you see a lot in riders, that it became, and going back to my friend Iannone, his nickname was the Maniac. It wasn't because of his riding, it was because he was also an OCD. And in fact, one of the things which I like to do to taunt riders, to torture riders, is when you... Apart from asking questions, which is bad enough, but some of them you can tell really are quite OCD. So what happens is that we sit behind a table and there'll be a bunch of children come up and everyone throws their phone down and starts asking questions. And the really, really nerdy ones will start straightening them make sure all the phones are completely straight. So to avoid them, just lean over and tap it just out of line to distract them. The point being also, like, if you distract them, they might actually give you an honest answer, which is always...
Also, if you're walking around the paddock and you see all those trucks lined up behind the pit boxes, the riders all have like their private little rooms inside there, and every time I've been into one of them, they're immaculate. There's not a speck of dust anywhere.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what they're saying is quite true. And I did a feature once where I went to interview Mark, and we talked about motocross. So we went to his local track, which is just outside the city of Lleida, in western Catalonia, and he rolled up in a van with his motocross bike in the back, and his dad was like his gopher. I'm sure you've all seen his dad on the TV pictures. Alex was there as well, riding, and Mark opened the back of this van, and his dad came running out to put the ramp down and get the bike out. The back of the van was like a factory motocross thing. It was gleaming. It was titanium. It was just absolutely spotless. And I was trying to think, is that because Mark is like that, or is he makes his dad do all that?
I honestly think it's part of being a rider, because the thing is, talent will get you a long way, hard work will get you a long way, and in the end, the difference between, in MotoGP, the difference between first and 15th is attention to detail. Those last tiny details, so they are all absolutely obsessing about, the tiniest little detail about where can I make the difference here? What if I do this? What if I try that? So they become extremely detail obsessed, and that detail obsession is not just in riding motorcycle, it's in every single part of their life.
And just on Kaczynski specifically, wasn't in the paddock at that point, but having spoken to some people that either worked with him as a technician or rode against him as a competitor, I think he was quite misunderstood. There was, I think, some of the more brasher characters of that era maybe wrote him off as a weirdo, quote unquote. Whereas I think, you know, maybe society in the 90s wasn't quite aware that, you know, some people suffer from these things, and you know, I think the fact that he stood out was a bit different to the general rider. He was really singled out for a lot of criticism.
Somebody who says if you ain't American, you ain't shit. You have to imagine he's rolling into the paddock like Trump Howell or something like that. You know, that would have been sort of typical of the stuff we've heard about Johnny.
Yeah. Also, I think Matt Oxley told me that Kaczynski one time told him when he was asked about his bike and how it performed in a specific race, he said, the turd in the toilet this morning in my hotel room was faster than my bike today. This is another great one.
Any other questions, guys? Any?
He was fine. Lorenzo was such a strange character. But, I mean, honestly, his father wrote a book, How to Raise a World Champion, when Lorenzo was like about 8 or not 10, quite young. And Lorenzo's father basically trained him to be a world champion. He bought him up separate from all the champions. He wasn't allowed to play. He had to go and do his mini bike circles around the car park. He had very little sort of social contract. Lorenzo taught himself to interact with people. It was funny. Lorenzo is one of the very few riders who, like I interviewed him a few times. But I sort of bumped into him in pit lane, and he sort of said, "Hi David, how are you?" Like the other sort of like nod or whatever. But he was very specific in doing, because he read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, and he used that as a guideline for how to interact with people. But he was fine. He's just a bit weird, because he was basically, he was basic child.
He was a lab rat. Yeah. He was a lab rat to be a motorcycle world champion.
Exactly. He was born to be a champion and not to be a human.
I interviewed him a few times and I found him fascinating, because he was this complex character, very polite, and then sort of like a twisted view on the world. He wasn't really the same as normal people, I guess you could say. And I mean, shameless plug, I've written a book and I had to cut out.
It's very good, you should buy it.
But I had to cut a bit about Jorge because I'd written too much and I had to cut the word limit down. But he was someone that when I'd spoken to, I really enjoyed it because he was very thoughtful, and he, again, another one of these riders that if you asked him the right question and you weren't talking about brakes or settings or the bike, it was more like lifestyle stuff, then he would really respond to that. And he was like a bit of a pleasure to work with. Actually, I was translating press releases for Derby, if I say it correctly. I think it was 2002 he made his debut here in Jerez, and he had to wait till the second day of practice because he was too young, and he had to wait till his 15th birthday. And I remember translating this press release from Spanish to English, and it came with this photo of a very stern looking, like 15-year-old. I thought he looks like 23 already. But then, of course, he made a huge splash, and he earned that nickname for Fuera on the outside. Was it 03 in Rio, where he sort of made that overtaking? I don't know if he finished on the podium or won that race, but yeah, I mean, what a rider.
In Qatar, Vinales got penalised for running too low a front tyre pressure, and I assume that lower limit is set by Michelin for safety reasons?
Yeah.
So if it's set for safety reasons, why aren't the riders who are running below that limit either crashing or destroying them tyres?
Well, the whole thing about the front tyres is quite complicated. What has happened in the past is basically teams were running very, very low pressures, and what Michelin do is they take sort of a sample of tyres. When they've seen riders running with very low pressures, what they've seen is they've taken the front away, and they've seen that there has been damage to the cords actually inside it. So the tyre has not failed, but it has not failed yet. So the problem is not that there is something, it hasn't caused a problem, but they can see that if we keep on going this way, the odds are it's going to happen. What happens, because they all start below the pressure, and then as you ride, the tyre temperature and pressure sort of rises up. until you get sort of to the working pressure. And so it's what they've done is an average over a certain. You have to be above a certain level for 60% of the race. I think 1.8 bar at the front over 60% of the race. And the difficulty for the teams is they have to set it for the race they're expecting. What happened to Maverick was he was expecting to be, I think he was starting second row, and he was expecting to be behind like 3 or 4 riders. He was expecting to be sort of stuck behind for a little while, but he was like in the lead within like 5, 6, 7. He was really quickly ahead of everyone else. So he didn't have the goal there, or he wasn't caught with the heat of the bikes in front of him. He wasn't in the slipstream.
And Maverick actually said, he said yesterday to us that he considered doing Marcus's strategy by, not having to manipulate the race order, but he saw that Mark was getting away and then had to make a decision that I either go for this or, he didn't have the comfort zone in Mark, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we should have the new Michelin next year, which should help, and then 2027 we get a completely new set of rules, 850cc bikes, no more ride-eye devices, because the ride-eye devices, so the ride-eye device, what it does is it lowers the back of the bike, and that changes the way that you brake completely. Because it changes the way that the bike sort of pitches in the corner. When you slam on the brakes, if anyone rides a motorcycle will know what it's like, slam on the brakes and the whole thing pitches forward. And when you've got the back of the bike down at the bottom, it's pitching a lot further and it's putting a lot of stress on the front tyre. Then you've got all the aero which is forcing the front wheel into the ground as well. So the front wheel, the front tyre gets an awful lot of takes an awful lot of punishment. A lot of that is going away, so it's going to be completely different. And we get Pirelli, so we've got no idea how that's going to work.
Dave, do you want to tell everybody about your tendency to crash at the German Grand Prix? Dave doesn't have a car. I mean, he drives this wonderfully red BMW GS, and he rides to the Sachsenring every year. And more than once we've seen him having to try to pick it up from.
Yeah, I'm getting very good at picking up bike. I've also managed to tear a muscle in the car when he's picking my bike up. Usually because I forget to take the disc lock off, and then I try and ride away. So, but I've now got a very bright yellow string to stop it. I still managed to do it last year. So.
Any more questions, anyone?
Yeah, this season, Jorge Martin as a rally world champion is obviously having a horrible time. Do you think that's because he's trying too hard, he feels the pressure of being the reigning world champion, he's got to get on that Aprilia and make that thing really work, or is it just bad luck, or what do you think?
Just because we're recording the podcast, there was a question about Jorge Martin having a difficult season and having to feel the pressure of being on an Aprilia. What do you reckon then?
Yeah, I think it's it's definitely a lot of bad luck. He seems to have got away with an awful lot over the last couple of years, and then it's all come in a quick succession of horrible incidents. I think he managed to do this brilliantly last year. He managed to control his emotions. I think he's naturally quite a nervous person. He has a nervous disposition, but he started working with a psychologist, a sports psychologist, quite a lot last year. He was able to control those nerves. We saw in his performances, put under all kinds of pressure in 2024, and managed to deal with it really, really impressively. But yeah, I think it was the fact that he knew that the Aprilia was not the Ducati. I think there was a sense of him rushing things in the Sepang test, where he first had that, it was the right wrist that he broke at Sepang after 13 laps. The thing was, he had just crashed a couple of laps previously, and he went out and had almost the same crash on the other side of the tyre straight afterwards. And yeah, you would think, surely you should have learned from that first incident and not repeated it, 10-15 minutes later. So yeah, I think there was a case of him just maybe trying to do too much too soon, and then what's happened since then is just, really unfortunate.
Yeah, the crash at Sepang was also, the conditions were really weird. Normally in Sepang, if you go outside and stand outside for about 15 minutes, then you suddenly start to think you're about to die. It's so hot and sweaty. But it was really, it was like 25, 26 degrees. It was lovely. But the track temperatures, initially bring their tyres there expecting tropical temperatures, and they weren't tropical temperatures. They were very cold. Also, they had the mediums. No one wanted to use the medium tyre. They had a medium and a soft tyre. No one wanted to use the medium. They went out on the medium. They used the mediums on the first day, so they didn't have to deal with them for the rest of the time. When they wanted to actually really start pushing the bike, to understand what needed to change. They wanted to have the softs. So you go out to test all sorts of other things first on the medium tyres. And the medium tyres just needed to be treated with a lot more care and respect. I think Jorge Martin, he just pushed a little bit too hard. He got a little bit unlucky. It was sort of 50% foolishness and 50% bad luck really. And then sort of since then, and what happened in Qatar, that was just really bad luck. Going over there. Normally, what happens is he goes off the edge of the curb, crashes, slides off, and feels a bit stupid. But he fell directly in front of Fabio Di Giannantonio. Digia couldn't miss him and hit him. It was horrific. That's the way that we've lost riders in the past. So honestly, it's an enormous amount of relief that he could walk away from that.
And just for Aprilia generally, usually every Grand Prix there's a group of 20 to 30 of us who play football on a Thursday night, and it's a real kind of gathering of people from Alpine Stars, KTM, Aprilia, Dorna, media. And last night I was giving a lift home to the guys responsible for the design of the RSGP across both teams. He was poached from Ducati actually 3 years ago. It's his third year in Aprilia, and he was saying to me that they've basically written off this season. They said when Jorge's ready to come back fit, then they have to start working on bike setting for next year. He said, because the team and the effort is essentially kind of decimated. There's not really that much to shoot for this year apart from trying to make sure that Martin can refine everything for 2026.
I don't think he should be on the bike at the top. I mean, we've said it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't dress yourself.
There is a fitness test.
Yeah,
exactly. I know you can say, is it rigorous enough, but
it's always really difficult because there's certain things, there are certain motions which are really difficult. I mean, like just normally putting on motorcycle gloves is quite difficult, really, having to pull it on. But he seemed to be, because he managed the sprint race fine. And he managed the rest of the time. He was slower than he should have been. But then again, he hadn't been on the bike. Like he'd only done 30 laps on the bike. One of those things, I was quite glad that he did actually wait that long. Might be better to wait until Jerez, but at least he waited that long. He did miss the first 4 races, and that's almost unheard of, unless you're in real trouble.
Guys, I think there's some probably more interesting people than us that are going to speak next. So we'll just take one more question. Sorry.
Thank you. You've already touched on the rule changes for 2027. Half the grid now have never worked with bikes that haven't had some form of adaptation enhancement, and half the field predate that. So thinking about my fantasy team for 2027, who do you think is going to benefit most or struggle most with the changes in 2027?
I refuse to talk about fantasy teams.
That is a really interesting question, but also the biggest change in 2027 is the tyres. Really, the tyres are what really messes with riders' head because the feeling is so different. It does seem that the difference between the Pirellis and Michelins is not as big as it was between the Michelins and the Bridgestones. So I think it's going to be a little bit closer. The Pirellis seem to have a certain amount of feel. Perhaps we can hear from some of the rookies about the Pirellis because they're running Pirellis now. But that's going to be a massive thing. Losing the ride height device is also going to be a big thing because the way that you brake is going to change enormously. The way that you start is going to change enormously because, right now, you've seen that if you've ever, you must have seen the pictures of them. They're drag bikes. They're not going to be drag bikes. They're going to have to manage wheelie themselves much more. They're going to have to manage braking much better. So it's going to be for a few riders. I think there's also going to be 2027 is going to be a really good year to come into MotoGP as a rookie, straight off of Moto2.
Not just 2027, but I also think the impending acquisition by Liberty Media is going to change MotoGP a little bit, depending on the territory and where you're from. I think there's 2 pivotal moments there that are really going to change the sport that we're watching now over the next 2 to 3 years. So, yeah. All right.
Just before we go, Adam is much too modest to say this himself, but he has written this wonderful book about MotoGP and what it's like to exist and everything. Lots of characters, lots of the protagonists of MotoGP have been interviewed. And Adam, I'd just like to ask you, first of all, how does it feel to have it out in the open, and how do people purchase this?
Because it was, I mean, like I sat next to you while you were writing a lot of it, and it did seem like quite a painful process.
It was like childbirth. Oh, I can see that.
Well, having been a father of 2 kids, trying to work out what was harder.
Ask his wife, I think I know the answer.
Probably, I feel myself turning red. I wasn't quite expecting a question like that. No, it's great. The thing is, I don't know how you guys digest MotoGP, whether you just watch it on TV or an app, or you read. For us as journalists, it's quite hard now, the media landscape, to actually write in-depth articles. Apart from Dave, of course, who now is going to, after this, disappear to his room until about 3 AM and write about 5,000 to 6,000 words on what's happened today on motormatters.com. But yeah, it's difficult now to really write. I mean, we're concentrating on podcasts, videos. That seems to be how people are learning about MotoGP. So just to write a book, I mean, I was lucky to find a publisher that was interested in MotoGP, and it was a way just to tell longer, more in-depth stories about some of the personalities in the paddock. And the only shame of it was that I wrote too much and I had to cut it, so that was a bit wounding.
What's the book called, Adam?
Yeah, very imaginatively titled Motorcycle Grand Prix Insider Stories. You can get it from any bookshop or on Amazon. But that was part of the algorithm and SEO optimization, which just makes me recoil having to say that. Stunted creativity, but thank you. Anyway. But I mean, we're back thanks to Gordon and the guys at Proposition Travel this year for helping us on the podcast, as well as Renthal. They've been a fantastic sponsor as well, and everybody who listens to it. So it can survive because it's listened to or watched nowadays on YouTube. So a big thanks, guys, for listening to us.
Stand in front for the moment, because I'm going to ask you to use some of your special skills. Because what we have, I've got a little Shark Tank here, right? And let's get to the sharks to some work, because one of the great joys in this business, and I've 21 years of this, is that I get to see some of the young riders start to develop right from the earliest stages, and and many of them, I had a chat with Brad Binder today, who we started working with in 2009, and he's a father. And I literally 60 seconds later, I walk back out of the box into the paddock. I bump into his dad, Trevor, and I'm reminding him around 2009 at Jerez at our hotel in the middle of nowhere, which served free beer. We had a few of those, and after about maybe 6 beers, let's call it that. And when I'm hearing about the stories, because I never encountered anybody from South Africa at all, but certainly not a rider and all that, he's telling me the stories, pardon the vernacular, I'm going to quote Trevor directly. Oh, I can't get a fucking seven in the front of the block, there's got to be a front of the any sponsorship whatsoever. And so I live by an adage, a saying from Ernest Hemingway, actually, who says that always follow through on promises made while drunk. It'll teach you to keep your big mouth shut. And of course, at that point, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll help out you, kid. Yeah, let me go meet him tomorrow. But obviously, it was a good call. And we've had seen so many young riders come through, and they're all wonderful. And I'm really delighted to bring 2 of them here tonight, because I think these are going to be some of the superstars in the future. And when they are MotoGP stars, 3 years from now, you can say you saw them here. And I'll come all the way from Australia. We've got Carter Thompson. And just as you thought no Americans were racing anymore, Christian Daniel. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is 2 seconds to tell us kind of how the day's going and how you like the track and whatnot. And then I want to ask, maybe you guys can ask them a few really difficult questions. All right, you're piranhas for sharks, yeah. Just like eat them up.
Shark Tank.
Yeah, Shark. This is it. So Christian, how was your day?
Well, first off, yeah, how's everyone doing? Hope you guys are all doing good. It was an interesting day for MotoGP, that's for sure. Pretty hot conditions in general. A lot hotter than last year. Better. Last year it rained, so it was a bit trickier, and I actually crashed in the wet patch on the race on Saturday. So I'm happy there's a lot of sun for today. So we're starting the weekend off pretty good. But yeah, overall it was pretty good. I did go watch the Moto3 session in the morning, which was absolutely zero wind, and I thought it was going to be like a perfect 0 kilometer wind day, but it was pretty windy at the end of the day. So yeah, we had to think about a few things while we were riding, especially even on our small bikes. We have to think about things like wind while we're riding. Not as much as MotoGP, but it still affects us. And yeah, I didn't feel amazing in the FPs. We had 2 FPs after MotoGP. But the qualifying, I did some changes on the bike, and I felt pretty good. Starting P7 for tomorrow, which is it's a good start for the race, and I just need to make sure I'm consistent for tomorrow and stay calm. First race of the season, so it's always really fun, and yeah, I hope to enjoy it tomorrow. So yeah, good luck. Thank you.
What about your day?
Yeah, it was pretty good. The conditions were better, they were quite good. I quite enjoyed it. Nice and hot for me, so more like Australia. But yeah, the day went pretty good. I felt pretty comfortable straight away in practice. Ended up topping the first practice and 5th in the second one. But yeah, everything was going quite good. Unfortunately, in qualifying and start of the session, I had a small crash, but ended up getting back up and going back out. But I only managed P9, but still looking forward to the race tomorrow. It's not a bad position, third row. I've got good pace, good speed, so just looking forward to the race tomorrow.
I have a question for the both of you, because you talked about the wind, and I know the wind at Jerez is really nasty, because it's always... Actually, this is more or less the sort of thing normally riders.
Same, or I think I'm, maybe a bit more. With my hair, it's probably.
That's cool, that's an old man. I've got a big hat. So, I've got a big hat, yeah, that's right. My hat is definitely bigger than yours. But the wind, because the wind is always a much bigger issue at Jerez than people realise, because it comes through that bowl down from the back straight and across sort of through 11 and 12, and it can really catch you out there, yeah?
Yeah, so it really comes from behind on the front straight, which is basically, it pushes you out on the 2 fast corners, penultimate and anti-penultimate corner. I'm trying to bring out big words so it impresses people. It affects you quite a lot, and you can feel it a lot, especially because the moment you kind of mess up your line, it's only gravel, literally on the outside. And the double curbs, it's a good improvement because that way you don't get green, but at the same time the double curbs they're pretty gnarly. You can take a trip on the double curbs. But yeah, it hits you pretty hard and 11 and 12, like you said.
What about you, Carson?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't help through those corners. Also, 7 and 8 can be quite difficult because it pushes you around. But there's also some corners where it does help, like turn 4, you can hold so much more corner speed because it's actually helping you turn through the corner. So it's a bit of some parts of the track you lose time, makes it more difficult, and some parts of the track it actually helps you so you can actually go quicker.
Do you ever get caught out if the wind changes? I mean, it's almost always the same wind, but then sometimes it will change, it will come from the other direction.
Yeah, if it changes and you're going through a corner expecting it to be windy, it can be a bit difficult. You normally run wide, hoping there's no gravel on the outside. Yeah, normally throughout the session it's quite even, but so yeah, it's the wind. It's in some ways it's good, some ways it's bad.
Guys, I've got to be honest that in the media centre we're usually quite busy when the rookies race is on. but then when it's the last 2 laps, that's when we start watching what's going on. And I just wanted to ask you two, what it's like planning a last lap or from the penultimate lap, because it looks just craziness. I mean, it's worse than Moto3. I just wonder when you're like in the heat of that, and how do you assess, or how do you kind of evaluate what's going on? How do you plan?
Well, honestly, I'll just be blatant. Last year, I feel like the only races I was really up there in the front group, I had no play in the battle, because it was, like I said, it's just chaos, and it was really my first time in some crazy group like that. So just to keep it humble, I was the type of guy that just stuck in the back and hoped someone crashed, so I got a position up. Obviously, this year is going to be a bit different. I'm a bit bigger than last year, which is good. But yeah, it's honestly, it's complete chaos. Last year, if any of you guys want to watch back, you can. Race 1 last year in Jerez was actually pretty chaotic in the last 2 laps. People taking each other out like it's like pinball, So it was pretty chaotic last year. I am pretty happy I will be part of that battle finally, and making some moves. But yeah, it's really chaotic all the time. I'd say probably now it's worse than Moto3, because if you guys have seen, Rueda has been pulling a pretty insane pace and big gap in every single race. It was a shame that the only thing that can stop him is if he has a bike problem, like if his engine blows up, which is what happened in Qatar. But yeah, he has a really insane pace, which is kind of stretching out the group, and it's kind of turning into like a MotoGP race. Hopefully not this weekend. I want to see some battling as well. But yeah, it's usually no one really pulls away in Rookies Cup. So
yeah, it's a bit hard to make a plan in our races. You don't exactly know what's going to happen. I normally just try and stay out of the mess for the first 3/4 of the race. And in the last couple of laps, if you see a gap, you just put your bike there and hope for the best. If it works, you make a position and keep going. But yeah, just try and stay as far up to the front as you can. Give yourself the best opportunity possible.
We all made a rubber anyhow. Bounce off each other. You're like a human pachinko machine.
Yeah.
I love how you make it sound so simple, Carter. Being from Australia and Kristen being from America, I mean, in Moto3 we see the majority of the field is either Spanish or Italian, or French, of course, yeah. So obviously the Junior GP or Red Bull Rookies or Supersport 300, all the races are in Europe. I think it's fair to say if you don't come from Europe, you're maybe naturally disadvantaged to try and get into this world. So I'm just curious, what kind of journey or sacrifices have you had to make coming from America or Australia to be in the Red Bull Rookies? Because it's not just a simple case of showing up and racing in the Rookies, right? You've had a very long journey to get here.
Yeah, so I mean, probably most of the guys, even in the past, that you have seen, probably, let's say from America, I'll take as an example, Joe Roberts, he grew up in the States, but he also moved to Europe when he was young. So it's kind of like most of the people that are foreign are basically from Europe because they trained in Europe. But no, so basically started racing, my racing career started when I was 6, so now it's basically like the 10th anniversary year, basically because I'm 16. But yeah, I mean, I really started out with small bikes. I started out with dirt because America is obviously very famous for its dirt tracking, a lot of flat track, a lot of motocross. Honestly, I don't know why I went that. I don't know why I didn't go that route, but I mean, I think it's because I just enjoyed road racing a lot more. And you know, as you guys can hear, the bike's revving outside, so that's the kind of type of mood it brings. So it's honestly awesome. But yeah, I was club racing in the States for about 2 to 3 years, and did we basically did one race in Barcelona. I'm now based in Barcelona right now, Spain. We did one race and we realized the level is completely different than the States, and my parents had to make a huge sacrifice. It's been 7 years now since I've relocated and live in Europe, in Spain, and yeah, so we made a huge move. We went overseas. We took the risk, obviously it's brought us here, so I think I'm at the peak of my age right now. And whenever I can, I will move up to World Championship if I keep showing, you know, good results and making good steps. But yeah, we made a lot of sacrifice throughout the years. It's been a really tough journey, to be honest. I gotta say, 2 years ago, it was a really difficult time, but it's good to see the results and, you know, be here today to talk to all of you guys. It's really nice. But yeah, honestly, it's something that me and my dad were talking about this a lot recently. He kind of saw it was kind of like an omen, like someone told us to go over, and it was kind of like, all right, we just gotta, you know, try our luck out. There's nothing my dad couldn't see when I was 6 years old. I wasn't a prodigy. I wasn't a maniac or anything. I was a regular kid going to school, and I randomly touched a bike, and we were like, hey, let's, you know, try something out. So yeah, it's been a really long path, but it's really nice to see some results and having fun is the main thing. So yeah.
What about you, Paddock?
Yeah, well, I started riding when I was 3, so it's been a while now, but yes. Also started in Australia with the dirt track motocross, because there's not a lot of road racing in Australia. Also, it's just more dirt track. Everyone more or less does that, and then for a normal Australian, you race dirt track and you go to America for flat track. So road racing isn't the biggest area, but we kept racing. I ended up doing the Asia Talent Cup. And then after that, we decided to move to Europe for the season, and we did European Talent Cup, and then got selected for the Red Bull Rookies Cup. So we had to relocate as well, because in Australia there's not much training options. In Spain you can go train whenever you want, more time on the track, more training like the Spanish guys, because they're at the pinnacle of the sport at the moment, and they definitely have the bases down pat, so they know exactly what they're doing. So you're just trying to train with the best to try and improve to be able to fly with the best.
I think your dad used to put it, the difference was a 1 hour drive or an 8 hour drive to get to the track.
Pretty much.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be an 8-hour drive if he lives in Australia. It'd be an 8-hour flight. It's a bit different. It's a bit different.
By the way, I think it's just only appropriate. We also introduced the true title sponsors of these kids, and I mean Christine Thompson and Christian Daniel. Thanks for all the shit you put up with.
Rewind. Right, must get email addresses as well. Yeah. And I've got to go away and write 12 million words. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys.